The known economic history of India begins with the Indus Valley Civilization, whose economy appears to have depended significantly on trade, which was facilitated by advances in transport. Around 600 BC, the Mahajanapadas minted punch-marked silver coins. The period was marked by intensive trade activity and urban development. By 300 BC, the Maurya Empire united most of the Indian subcontinent. The political unity and military security allowed for a common economic system and enhanced trade and commerce, with increased agricultural productivity. For the next 1,500 years, India produced its classical civilizations such as the Rashtrakutas, Hoysalas and Western Ganges. During this period, India is estimated to have had the largest economy of the ancient and medieval world between 01 AD until 16th century AD, controlling between 1/3 and 1/4 of the world's wealth up to the time of Maurya Empire, from when it rapidly declined during European intervention, thanks to its prehistory as a trading zone and later the colonial status. Colonial India experienced a deep economic integration with the world. Trade, investment and migration rose to higher levels than before. According to economic historian Angus Maddison in his book The World Economy, A Millennial Perspective, India was the richest country in the world and had the world's largest economy until the 16th century AD. India has followed central planning for most of its independent history, which have included extensive public ownership, regulation, red tape, and trade barriers. After the 1991 economic crisis, the central government launched economic liberalization. India has turned towards a more capitalist system and has emerged as one of the fastest-growing large economies of the world. Indus Valley Civilization. Indus Valley Civilization, the first known permanent and predominantly urban settlement that flourished between 3500 BC and 1800 BC, boasted of an advanced and thriving economic system. Its citizens practiced agriculture, domesticated animals, made sharp tools and weapons from copper, bronze and tin, and traded with other cities. Evidence of well-laid streets, layouts, drainage system and water supply in the valley's major cities Harappa, Lothal, Mohenjo-Daro and Rakhigarh reveals the knowledge of urban planning. Ancient and medieval characteristics. Though ancient India had a significant urban population, much of India's population resided in villages, whose economy was largely isolated and self-sustaining. Agriculture was the predominant occupation of the populace and satisfied a village's food requirements besides providing raw materials for hand-based industries like textile, food processing and crafts. Besides farmers, other classes of people were barbers, carpenters, doctors, goldsmiths, weavers, etc. Religion, especially Hinduism and Jainism, played an influential role in shaping economic activities. Pilgrimage towns like Allahabad, Benares, Nashik and Puri, mostly centered around rivers, developed into centers of trade and commerce. Religious functions, festivals and the practice of taking a pilgrimage resulted in a flourishing pilgrimage economy. Economics in Jainism is influenced by Madhavara and his principles and philosophies. His philosophies have been used to explain the economics behind it. He was the last of the 24 Tirthankars who spread Jainism. In the economics context, he explains the importance of the concept of anukanta, family business. In the joint family system, members of a family pooled their resources to maintain the family and invest in business ventures. The system ensured younger members were trained and employed in the family business, and the older and disabled persons would be supported by the family. The system, by preventing the agricultural land from being split, ensured higher yield because of the benefits of scale. Such sanctions curbed the spirit of rivalry in junior members and made a peculiar sense of obedience. Organizational entities, along with the family-run business and individually owned business enterprises. Ancient India possessed a number of other forms of engaging in business collective activity, including the Ganapani, Paga, Vrata, Sangha, Nagama and Sreni. Nagama, Pani and Sreni refer most often to economic organizations of merchants, craftspeople and artisans, and perhaps even paramilitary entities. In particular, the Sreni was a complex organizational entity that shares many similarities with modern corporations, which were being used in India from around the 8th century BC until around the 10th century AD. The use of such entities in ancient India was widespread, including virtually every kind of business, political and municipal activity. The Sreni was a separate legal entity which had the ability to hold property separately from its owners, construct its own rules for governing the behavior of its members, and for it to contract, sue and be sued in its own name. Some ancient sources such as Laws of Manu and Chanakya's Arthashastra have rules for lawsuits between two or more Sreni, and some sources make reference to a government official who worked as an arbitrator for disputes amongst Sreni from at least the 6th century BC onwards. There were between 18 and 150 Sreni at various times in ancient India, covering both trading and craft activities. This level of specialization of occupations is indicative of a developed economy in which the Sreni played a critical role. Some Sreni could have over 1,000 members, as there were apparently no upper limits on the number of members. The Sreni had a considerable degree of centralized management. The headman of the Sreni represented the interests of the Sreni in the king's court and in many official business matters. The headman could also bind the Sreni in contracts, set the conditions of work within the Sreni, often received a higher salary, and was the administrative authority within the Sreni. The headman was often selected via an election by the members of the Sreni, who could also be removed from power by the General Assembly. The headman often ran the enterprise with 2 to 5 executive officers who were also elected by the assembly. Coinage, punch-marked silver ingots, in circulation around the 5th century BC, and the first metallic coins were minted around the 6th century BC by the Mahajanapadas of the Gangetic Plains were the earliest traces of coinage in India. While India's many kingdoms and rulers issued coins, barter was still widely prevalent. Villages paid a portion of their agricultural produce as revenue, while its craftsmen received a stipend out of the crops at harvest time for their services. Each village, as an economic unit, was mostly self-sufficient. GDP estimate. According to economic historian Angus Maddison in his book Contours of the World Economy, 1-2030 ad. Essays in Macroeconomic History, India had the world's largest economy during the years 01 AD and 1000 AD. During the Maurya Empire, there were a number of important changes and developments to the Indian economy. It was the first time most of India was unified under one ruler. With an empire in place, the trade routes throughout India became more secure, thereby reducing the risk associated with the transportation of goods. The empire spent considerable resources building roads and maintaining them throughout India. The improved infrastructure combined with increased security, greater uniformity in measurements, and increasing usage of coins as currency enhanced trade. Mughal Empire. During the Mughal period in the 16th century, the gross domestic product of India was estimated at about 25.1% of the world economy. An estimate of India's pre-colonial economy puts the annual revenue of Emperor Akbar's treasury in 1600 at £17.5 million. The gross domestic product of Mughal India in 1600 was estimated at about 24.3% the world economy, the second largest in the world. By the late 17th century, the Mughal Empire was at its peak and had expanded to include almost 90% of South Asia, and enforced a uniform customs and tax administration system. In 1700, the exchequer of the Emperor Aurangzeb reported an annual revenue of more than £100 million. In the 18th century, Mughals were replaced by the Marathas as the dominant power in much of India, while the other small regional kingdoms, who were mostly late Mughal tributaries such as the Nawabs in the north and the Nizams in the south, declared an autonomy. However, the efficient Mughal tax administration system was left largely intact. By this time, India had fallen from the top rank to become the second largest economy in the world. A devastating famine broke out in the eastern coast in early 1770s, killing 5% of the national population. Economic historians in the 21st century have found that in the 18th century real wages were falling in India, and were far below European levels.